since the revolution of 1979, the Iranian government has been using the CIA-led coup as a shining example of the injustices being imposed on Iran by the United States and the fact that they can't be trusted. It is basically drilled into every Iranian's brain, whether it's in school, as part of Friday prayers, or whenever it is, it's that we have been basically hurt deeply by the United States in the past, if you will. So there have been some positive developments throughout the years. We had a moderate candidate come into power in Iran, Khatami, in 1997. Folks were very happy about that and saw some change coming about because as uprisings go, it didn't go in the direction that a lot of folks wanted the revolution to go. A little pointer for those looking for drastic change. There should be a plan for what happens next so that folks with bad intentions don't take over. But with Khatami, unfortunately, Iran is not so much a democracy, it's a theocracy. There's the supreme leader that has a lifetime tenure. No one votes for him. He has the final say. We have our advisory councils, our assembly of experts, etc. And so the president didn't have a lot of power. But there was a slight little opening there with Khatami, especially because he did very much say that he wants to open things up with the United States. With the election of Barack Obama in 2009, there was hope yet again. And I want to stress when I say that Iran and the US were pretty friendly before all of this happened, it really, really was that way. My dad studied in the US just because everyone in his generation studied in the US. Folks would go back and forth, exchange semesters, grad school, Iranians would go to the US. There was a lot of back and forth, and so there has been a lot of rich history between families in Iran and the US. And so in these years, a lot of those connections have been lost due to the way the two countries have been. So with the presidency of Obama, you know, we had the nuclear deal that was signed between the US, members of the European Union, permanent members of the United States Security Council, and some sanctions were removed from Iran, really creating a lot of relief. In May of 2018, so this past year, the current administration said it was withdrawing from the Iran deal. This is despite Iran having followed its end of the deal and just seeing that the US decided to back out of it. So again, we see history repeating itself where Iran kind of opened up, agreed to this deal, and kept their end of the deal, and then the US decided to backtrack and go out of it and to withdraw from it. I can't stress enough how much fodder this has provided for the right-wing fundamentalists in Iran. They yet again can show and point the finger and show that the United States cannot be trusted. They will go back on their deals. They will only do things for their own interests. And so this very much affects everyday people. Iran has been under sanctions since the revolution of '79. Almost 80 to 90% of the country are already under sanctions. There's really not much left there to sanction, to be honest with you. It very much affects millions of everyday people. My parents are there right now, actually. They go back and forth between Iran and Austria. And it's pretty nerve-wracking waking up every day and trying to figure out if the commander-in-chief has decided to bomb the country overnight or if he changed his mind at 1 in the morning, which happened a few weeks ago. And so, you know, despite popular opinion that sanctions don't affect medication, food, or life-saving resources, that is very much not the case. Getting permission to do business with Iran and to trade goods can be very expensive and difficult, and so a lot of countries and businesses are very, very careful and don't want to be fined due to some kind of sanction policies in place. Therefore, that has made attaining life-saving medical equipment, prescription drugs, and raw goods not as readily available. In 2016, over 6 million patients were lacking essential treatment as a direct result of sanctions. We have had so many more rounds of sanctions since. I have family members that cannot buy their medications that they require. Sometimes they're available on the black market for a lot more expensive and with a lot more uncertainty. Not to mention that sanctions have wreaked havoc on the economy. Inflation rates are over 50%. Every time I hear about the conversion rate and how much inflation there is, my heart just stops. I cannot believe how little value Iranian currency now has. Unemployment is through the roof. Folks are suffering every single day due to this policy. Not to mention that the travel ban has wreaked havoc on Iranians. Again, the US used to be such a big presence for a lot of Iranians. We have had Iranians living in the US for decades and decades, and the travel ban caused a lot of issues between folks being able to see their family, especially parents and grandparents, but it has caused a lot of damage to everyday individuals. Sanctions contribute to the erasure of human rights and to democracy in countries that have been fighting for years and years and try to bring about better results for the country. They destroy the middle class, they destroy the working class, they destroy all the communities that have been working hard to bring about more democratic principles and human rights values. Folks in Iran are suffering so much that they don't have the capacity to fight back. Not to mention that drug addiction has been soaring in the last few years, and I've heard from many in Iran that the government just turns a blind eye because when you're addicted to a substance, you don't have as much time to be politically involved. So that's a better option for them. So this administration has surrounded itself with the very same people that were part of the warmongers during George W. Bush's time, how we got into Iraq, how we got into Afghanistan, and these very same people are in those positions of power again, beating the drums of war, and none of this has to do with human rights or democracy or any of that. As you mentioned earlier, we don't even pretend it is that way anymore. We're just looking for resources. It's about money and power, it's about greed, it's about getting more and more resources from the global south. So I really want to just urge everyone to be aware of this, being aware of the distrust that has been built there for generations and generations, and how Iranians themselves as a group had such friendly connections with Americans throughout their lives, and all of that has been so impacted and ripped apart by policies by both countries.
Now, when I went to Venezuela, there were a lot of things that had been happening. I had actually been to Venezuela when I was in 2006 for the World Social Forum. So I had seen it at that point when Chavez was leading the great movement, and people were out there, and we had people from all over the world. I was invited by PCAS, the Portland Central American Solidarity Committee, to go on this delegation. Plus one of the muralists there, Santino, who did murals he was sort of one of the leaders of the 23 Enero, one of the barrios that was significant in when they tried the coup against Chavez, came out, armed themselves, and fought off the coup offenders. And basically were sort of the heroes of bringing him back into office. So it was an incredible place to be. It was an incredible time to be there. I come back, I'm involved in, like I said, human rights issues. I was a labor organizer with the Printing Pressmen's Union. I went through a lot of things. As you listen to the stories, and as being a Vietnam veteran, it's not new. It's the continuous pattern that's happened over and over again. Sanctions, these false flags that they put up to blame and demonize those various people in various countries that they decide that they are going to either disrupt, take over, usually for oil or other resources. So that's something to always keep in mind. Venezuela, do they really care about the democracy and the plight of the people in Venezuela? If we look at the plight of people here in the U.S., you'd have to say no, because you have a huge homeless situation in this country. You have people that are dying because they're not getting their health care benefits. Who's intervening in this country to change that? Nobody. So this is one of the things you have to continually think about. A friend of mine sent me this book called The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela, How the U.S. Orchestrated the Coup for Oil. This is by Dan Kovalek, and a foreword by Oliver Stone, which I kind of want to read that because I think it's really powerful. In a quite revealing statement, the senior Trump administration officials recently asserted the cumulative effects of the U.S. sanctions against Venezuela like Darth Vader's death grip upon the country. This, of course, is true. These sanctions are deadly, and they are killing Venezuelans. The U.S. is attempting to starve out the people of Venezuela as it has people of so many countries, Chile, Iran, Nicaragua, until they bend to its will. Meanwhile, the U.S. and its compliant media blame Venezuela for the starving. Now, what is most revealing about the Darth Vader quip, however, is that it is inadvertent admission of a quite obvious truth, which is, if we're willing to acknowledge it, that the U.S. is the empire in this saga unfolding. Okay, not just Venezuela, but around the world. And with the thousands of or so many bases across the globe, the U.S. empire is dwarfing all others. Unlike other empires, the U.S. has never consciously admitted its an imperial status. And the U.S. is an empire in this morality tale, then surely Venezuela and its people are the outgunned rebels. In here they talk about various the electrical grid going down. They talk about, there's even talk about how the sanctions are affecting people. Of course, I know that these sanctions are affecting people because I was there. And there was an economic report that talked about 40,000 people, because of the sanctions, over 40,000 people have died because they're not able to access their medicines, and and the hospitals would be shut down because of the electrical power grid out, etc. So these are the same things you were just talking about. This is a continuation of the same kind of problem. The other is so I get this offer to go to Venezuela, and of course I just jump at the chance, But as I'm flying into there, the power grid was out, and my flight was canceled from Miami to go into Venezuela. So when we arrive in Caracas, it's dark, it's already starting to get dark. The hotel did have power, but throughout the city there was no power. That meant there was no electricity, there was no water, that meant the toilets weren't being flushed, fresh water wasn't available. You had all of these problems. At the same time that was happening, the U.S. had basically said that, I should back up a little bit. Max Blumenthal actually reported that Marco Rubio and others had actually predicted the blackout before it actually happened. So when we say, the Maduro would say that there was sabotage. The sabotage has been going on in Iran with the nuclear power system. They shut it down. Cyber sabotage is happening all over the world, so it's very likely. So I get in there, of course, I could talk about, all of the different suffering that's going on, but in reality what you come down to is what everybody has been talking about, and that is that the U.S. has made every effort to destabilize Venezuela. It has brought into you had John Bolton, who is no longer there, but John Bolton, who really led the effort to go into Venezuela and destroy it. And who did they bring along with them? The envoy was Elliot Abrams, who in the 1980s was a part of the Central America and the Iran-Contra. He was a felon, lied before Congress. And this is the people that are continually trying to destabilize the country. And for what? For oil. It is always about oil. But one of the things that you don't realize is that while I was there, that electrical grid that was supposed to be out was supposed to be the time in which there was an upheaval. It was the black flag that was saying, that now, since this is happening, people are going to rise up. They're going to call for a coup. They're going to go after, Guaido had called for, Juan Guaido, who is the person who declared himself president of Venezuela and was recognized by Trump administration, and still is. But Juan Guaido had called for a big demonstration. Well, we arrived, and the people went to try to go to find out about that demonstration. Nobody showed. There was another demonstration later on towards the end that was supposed to take over the National Assembly, and there was only a few people that showed. So his power had already waned. He had already lost his influence throughout. But when I went to a demonstration in support of Maduro and the Bolivarian Revolution, hundreds of thousands were in the street. Now that is an amazing story. And we met with ministers, and we met with various different people from various areas. The reality is people are hungry. The reality is the economy is so inflated that people can't afford anything. Just recently, the government, Maduro, they raised the minimum wage by about, I think, 50% more. But what does that mean if you can't buy anything? These are some of the problems that are existing. So what the people are doing to meet some of the food needs is they're doing urban farming. And so they took us to various areas. So rooftops and vacant lots, people are being trained. They're going about creating a larger percentage. The barrios were creating their own farmland and animal husbandry. These were ways to meet some of the nutritional needs that were lacked. So there's a great chance that they were trying to build something there. Now, I understand a little bit about what it would be like not to be able to get your medicine, because when I was going to leave, they canceled my flight going home. I'm a diabetic. I have medicine that I only planned for the days that I was going to be there, and I ended up being 5 days more, and it was getting scary. I was actually weaning myself a little bit from my medications, just taking half, and just luckily that I was able to get out through Copa Airlines again and make it. So I understand what it was like not to be able to get your medication. And that's happening in this country. People cannot get their medication in this country.
A few comments about U.S. support of the war in Yemen, which Dan writes includes its support of the Saudi Arabian and United Arab Emirates with their military strikes on that nation. U.S. Special Forces actions on the ground in Yemen's historical place as the first country to be targeted by U.S. drone strikes, which continue today, as part of the never-ending war on terror. And that's what Dan wrote down there, and I don't have that much to add to it. I'm going to quote from an article by Dr. Cesar Chilala, which hopefully will not take too long. But let's cut to the chase. Yemen had proven oil reserves of around 3 billion barrels as of January 1st, 2012, and petroleum accounted for roughly 25% of GDP. At the current rate of infection, experts estimate that the number of cases will reach 7 figures by the end of the year. Presently, almost 20 million Yemenis, more than 2/3 of the population, do not have access to clean water and sanitation. Since the beginning of the conflict, the emergency healthcare needs of the population have been so great that the healthcare workers are unable to provide even basic medical care. When fighting intensified in some areas, there were no formal rescue services, so residents and relatives had to dig out their loved ones from the rubble of damaged buildings. An Amnesty International report, Yemen, the Forgotten War, describes the consequences of the attacks carried out by Saudi Arabia's coalition, More than 4,600 civilians killed, 8,000 injured, 3 million people forced out of their homes, 18.8 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, including food, water, shelter, fuel, and sanitation, and 2 million children out of school. Na 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 na. The flow of the arms continues unabated. The irresponsible and unlawful flow of arms, is a quote to the warring parties in Yemen, has directly contributed to civilian suffering on a massive scale. That's according to James Lynch from Amnesty International. As Iran continues its support of the Houthis' ragtag army, reports indicate that Saudi Arabia will purchase $7 billion worth of arms from the U.S. Human Rights Watch has documented that the Saudi-led coalition is using internationally banned cluster munitions and at least 16 attacks at targeted populated areas, killing scores of civilians, including women and children. European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy passed a resolution to launch an initiative aimed at imposing an EU arms embargo against Saudi Arabia because of its conduct against civilians in Yemen. In the meantime, health facilities continue to be hit by bombs, and health and humanitarian workers are increasingly targeted. In a scene out of Guernica, Abel Sabri, the resident of Mocha, a port city on the Red Sea coast of Yemen, described a Saudi Arabia airstrike which killed at least 63 civilians. Quote, it was like something out of Judgment Day, corpses and heads scattered, engulfed by fire and ashes, end quote.
Looking at the Black Panthers and, WIC, and being there for women and children, providing the education, providing the health care, that kind of community care is needed if we're asking entire communities to sacrifice some comfort to be out there for others. Like, that community connection and care is very, very important.
I have to go back to the Vietnam War because, when you talk about revolution, you also talked about the Vietnamese who actually led a liberation movement that aroused the hopes and aspirations of countries all over the world. To decolonize, and then the U.S. lost that war. A lot of people, in this world, will think about that somehow it was the anti-war movement or it was this, but the Vietnamese actually stuck it out and fought. They have to be the ones that we really recognize that won that war. But there was also something else that was happening in this country, and that was the GI resistance movement. And the GI resistance movements was people in Vietnam at that time creating mutinies and refusing to go in and kill people. When they came out, they became Vietnam veterans against the war. They spoke out. They talked about Winter Soldier. They threw their medals away. They didn't want to. They had learned something about the war and about the people and about that the administration, that this corporate world had betrayed them. They were told that they were there to defend our interests, that the communist world, the domino theory was going to come, and that's what we're still hearing, really. That's what they really keep saying. It's the communists, the Venezuelan Socialist Party that is responsible for what is happening in that country. But they don't talk to you about the benefits that happened in that country.
This is what we're seeing with Extinction Rebellion, and this is what we're seeing in Chile, this is what we're seeing in Hong Kong, this is what we're seeing in Iraq. These are mass movements which are driven by absolute need. And so it is those who feel that need who will lead the movement, whether we like it or not. And I think the old peace and justice movement, I'm proudly old, proudly peace and justice, is here to inform and strengthen that movement with what we have available.
And what we need to do is to build that coalition where people can have a common cause to work for it. Climate strike is that common cause. The war is that common cause, because those two are actually interconnected, and you can't separate them. If you do, you're always going to be fighting one over the other. We need to bring this together as a coalition to fight on these issues. And again, it has to do with profit before people, and we need to change that economic system.
I really love Adrienne Marie Brown and her work and the concept of Afrofuturism and just questioning things. They talk a lot about, we used to have primarily monarchies in place, and the world looked very different. And those folks thought, this is it. This is how the world is. Look at how different it looks now. I think we become very comfortable and complacent and think, this is it. Let's just make the best of it, while exercising the questioning of everything and exercising just looking at things from a more critical lens and sharing that experience with others is so crucial. I hear folks talking about like, oh no, look at like the number of houseless folks. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that terrible? We have so many empty condos. Just like flipping the script, or with things like that. Or, if a politician constantly only talks about the middle class, they're leaving out a class below that. So what about that one? Just really being critical and questioning all these things. Why is it that we think about fast food workers every time we think about less than living wages? Why is there such a thing as any type of occupation where we think it's okay to not pay people a living wage? Making this exercise just part of your everyday life has become my favorite thing, and I just really encourage folks to share that with others, of looking past the structure and foundation we have now. It doesn't have to stay this way. If you just like open up your mind and think of what you want, move towards that. Stop constraining yourself with what you think the system should be. When in doubt, I follow those most impacted, follow Indigenous communities and their efforts in their movements, follow Black women and femmes, follow refugees, follow Pacific Island folks that are fleeing as climate refugees. When in doubt, I don't get as involved with Twitter wars or more privileged folks on the left versus other privileged folks on the left. None of that matters at the end of the day. Following those that are most impacted and letting them lead is the way I go about it.